Welcome to another webinar of our educational sessions project. Today, as you already know, we are going to be talking about how to get the most out of Confluence with information architecture. This is the agenda for today's webinar. I am going to introduce my dear colleague Fugi, who's today's speaker. And then Fugi is going to go over all the bullet points that you see here: information architecture, goals and approach, content structure and quality, design examples. And then we're going to finish things by wrapping up and opening space for questions. If you are new to ServiceRocket, it is nice to meet you. Just a little bit about us. We are a platinum solution partner, and we have been part of the Atlassian ecosystem for more than 15 years already. And our goal is to help companies to get the most from their software and enable them to transform the way they do business. Finally, I have a picture of the man here, Fugi. Fugi is a dear colleague. He's the solutions manager here at ServiceRocket. Fugi has a huge amount of experience when it comes to solutions that relate to Confluence, Jira Software, Bitbucket, you name it. He's that Jira guy who everybody wants to have around sometimes. So, Fugi, with that said, I'm going to let you take the lead, and I'm going to let you do your magic.
Thank you, Mario. Can you hear me well, Mario?
Yep.
All right. Thank you. I'm not sure how true what Mario said at the last statement is, but yeah, hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for choosing to spend your precious time with us today. My name is Fugi, and I will be bringing you along on this journey to get the most out of your Confluence instance via information architecture. Before we begin though, I'd like to first set some expectations for what we will be doing for the next 30 minutes. Information architecture for Confluence is a really, really broad topic that we can spend hours and hours on discussing the intricate details. And usually this kind of engagement that we have with customers to discuss information architecture can last up to 2 weeks or sometimes months to make sure all the taxonomy is set right. We will not be doing that today, obviously, due to the time constraint. So the way I will be doing it is I will give you some brief ideas without showing too many demos or details. And if these items do tickle your interest, then feel free to search in the Atlassian ecosystem. Yeah, you can write down some notes while you're at it. And then I'm sure you'll be able to find some great ideas for your own Confluence deployment. But do feel free to ask some questions via the chat feature. And hopefully we will be able to answer some of these during the end of the session. All right, next slide, please. All right. Now, the main aim of information architecture is to deal with these two very common complaints or questions from users. I'm sure this is very familiar to you guys, and I'm sure you've heard it from your users, or you may have asked it yourself before while using Confluence. Your user may have created a new page filled with wonderful content, but where do I put this? Or you may be trying to look for a location's leave policy. Let's say you're trying to, I'm in London over here, and the weather is surprisingly good for London today. Anyway, so let's say I'm in the London office and I'm trying to figure out how many leaves can I apply in a year. How do I find it in the company's Confluence? So first off, as a quick question break, what are some of the ways your organization deals with this kind of situation? How do you structure your content right now? Any ideas that you can put in the chat? All right. If there's no ideas on this yet, then I guess we will cover them in more detail throughout the next few slides. So let's go on to the next slide then. All right, now a common request we get from customers is to provide them with a template kind of space structure whenever we do Confluence consulting, but that usually doesn't work. The way we do it is we just make it fit. There's no point trying to give you a template that it's not going to work because your users could be different. Your culture is different in your organization. So how we do it is we understand the logical flow of your users, of the different personas, to see how they usually think, how they access items based on how they're used to in your organization. And then we understand your organization structure, like how do you separate your different business units? How do you separate the different projects, the departments, what should be a space? And then we then translate all of this, the logical flow and the organization, into Confluence tools. Essentially, what would be a space, what would be a page tree, what would be a space category, permission, etc. Next slide, please. So let's talk about goals and approach of information architecture to give you more idea into what we are trying to achieve here. So next slide. So like I mentioned earlier, the main goal is very important, which is to make it fit. There's no point giving you something that is set in stone, but in the end, your users are not familiar with it. It seems strange to have those kind of taxonomy. So then the next one is to make it flexible. So your design should be flexible, it should be pragmatic, and able to adapt to the changing use cases for different organizations within your company. And lastly, this is a topic that I will cover quite a bit today, which is to make the content dynamic through the use of macros that reduce redundancy of data and maintains a single source of truth throughout the entire Confluence deployment without requiring manual updates in every page. If your users are required to do manual updates to pages all the time, that already is a biggest red flag when it comes to information architecture, because your content is not going to be fresh. So that's something that we will discuss in detail, especially today. So let's go on to the next slide. All right. So how we do it, usually with our customers, how we approach a information architecture consulting is we first learn the tools and the organization. I like to say it this way to my customer is, this stage is what we call discovery. And during discovery, essentially me as a consultant, or let's say if you're trying to consult within your own organization, you should be so familiar with your organization or that you're consulting for, to the point that you're almost like the employee within that space. So you need to learn the tools, the organization, and then you map these two together. You map it with the Confluence tools like spaces, page trees, space categories. You map those taxonomy together. And then after that, you test the design by identifying like content, power users or content champions or knowledge champions within the team that you're working for, and then ask them to test the design, see how they react to the design, the different taxonomy. And usually we advise doing this with a prototype. Could be a sandbox instance that you have a prototype for. And then after that, you refine the design based on their feedback. And once somebody gives you a feedback, you refine the design, it's going to affect some other users. So you need to repeat the steps if necessary. So this whole process, learn, map, test, refine, and repeat, is going to get you to the best solution information architecture design for Confluence. Next slide, please. All right, one common debate that needs to be addressed is what should be a space and what should be a page tree. Now keep this in mind as we go to the next slide. All right, consider the following organization structure. Look at how the people team is further divided into recruitment, facilities, and benefits. These are what we consider squads within the people team. In this case, what would be the space here? Should it be a space for each squad within the people team? Or a people space followed by the recruitment page tree, facilities page tree, benefits page tree? What do you guys think? Do write your answers in the chat window, please. And then we can discuss this in detail. So the question is, if you didn't catch the question, is how would you organize the spaces here? Should it be a space for each recruitment, facilities, and benefits squads? I see some answers there.
Yep.
Yep, people level, you have a space. Yep, that's a good idea as well. And then that's good, Brian, thank you. And then Rob said, depends on the size of the company. That is very true. That's something that we will discuss in a while. Teams or units, okay. What do you mean by that, Egil? Is it by organization units? Is it, in this case, would it be recruitment? A space for recruitment? Mikhail, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Space for people, IT and finance. Yep, that's one way you can achieve that. Oh, thanks, Egil. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the next slide then. Thank you. Thanks for the answers. All of those answers are correct, by the way. Amazing. There's actually no right and wrong answer here. There's always different ways of doing it. That's why I often tell customers, you cannot ask us to give you like a best practice and just implement it for your organization without first letting us understand how your organization is, which is why I need to really understand how your organization is structured to the point that I'm almost like an employee before I can even give you the best practice here. So like what Rob mentioned there, it really depends on the size of the company. It really depends on how your company culture is like as well. So while splitting those squads into spaces will give you better focus, it will, however, require more navigation. And vice versa, if you split them into page trees, it will result in less spaces, less navigation, but potentially messy page trees. So next slide, I will explain this in detail in the next slide. So in this case, in this example, say a user is looking at a travel benefit page as they are working out the details regarding their business travel. Let's say I'm trying to travel to the United States. And then in this case, my benefits for my travel, like my per diem, what kind of flights I can take. Is it business class? I hope it's business class. So that's a note to ServiceRocket. Anyway, now this page, if we split the squads into spaces, would be in the people benefits space, right? If you split this into people-benefits, people-facilities, so the page that I'm looking at, the benefits will be in this space. Now, she or he may then need to navigate to the people facility space to find out how to book the company apartment for their stay, right? So they've already seen their benefits for per diem, for airline travel, and then they realize that they should stay in the company apartment. But how do I book the company apartment? Then they need to navigate to the people facility space. This, if let's say this requires them to go to the space directory to find the people facility space, will require more clicks and potentially more confusing space search. Anytime your users need to go to the space directory is not a good sign. Usually that's what I tell my customers. Prevent as much as possible a situation where your user constantly needs to go to the space directory. So that's an important note to take note there. All right, next slide, please. Now, in contrast, you can also, like most of what you guys are suggesting here, is to have the people space, right? And then you split those different squads into page trees. Now, this makes sense, right? Because then now if your user is looking at the benefits of the travel benefits, their per diem, etc., and then let's say they want to go into company apartment booking, they can just click on, they just expand the facilities page tree, and then they will find the company apartment guide, which is really, really straightforward. Less space, less navigation, but it may potentially lead to messy page trees if there are a lot of squads and restrictions are not well defined to prevent users accidentally creating pages anywhere. A common problem here is we have customers doing this, which is great, but then they don't restrict it well enough that any users can just come into the space and just create page wherever they like. And then what you end up seeing is that then you suddenly have a bunch of pages in the root space, the root of the space, which is very confusing for other users. Now, this is why there is no one-size-fits-all solution, definitely no best practice that can be concretely defined here. It really depends on the complexity of your organization and its culture. All right, next slide. Now, despite all the good work you can do to structure your pages well, it can all be thwarted if your users perceive that the pages are stale or outdated. Now, how do we prevent pages from being outdated? How do we keep content fresh without requiring too many manual effort, updating every single page every single day? Now, to do it, some remedies, from reactive ones to proactive ones. Reactive ones will require users to flag pages that are outdated, for example, using like the app like outdated for Confluence. Or you also might use things like analytics for Confluence for content curators to look for content that is less viewed or has been a long time since it was last modified. So those are the reactive ways of dealing with outdated content. But the best way is what I'm trying to suggest here, which is a proactive approach. Now, I would recommend making your content as dynamic as possible, and we will be looking at some examples later by reusing content via excerpts as much as you can. Next slide, please. So an example here that you should really consider using more in your Confluence instance, if you haven't started already, is to use page properties as much as you can. And these two macros, page properties and page properties report macro, we will not go into detail how to use them. If you're interested, do feel free to contact us and we can guide you further. But essentially, these two macros come in pairs, and it will be you will essentially insert the page properties macro in a number of pages. In this case, automations and scripts, screens and fields, those kind of pages. You insert the page properties macro, and then you have an index page that indexes all of this using the page properties report macro. Now, it essentially gives you a summary of all the pages metadata in this case. Now, this is dynamic because once you make a change in the page's properties macro, it will automatically be updated in the index page. So let's say, for example, my document status is now changed from done to in progress. Let's say it's reopened or done to draft. I just need to change it in the page, and the index page gets updated as well. If you use this right, you're going to see that your content is really, really fresh. The next one is even more powerful, which is, next slide, please, is excerpt include. I see a lot of users do tend to use page properties like the one I showed before, but excerpt include not used as often as I would like. So this one is also similar to page properties report macro, but it's even more powerful to make your content fresh. So in this case, you have to use also, this also comes in pairs, excerpt and excerpt include. You must put the excerpt in a specific content that you want to repeat across multiple pages. Let's say, for example, in this case, this is a project schedule that we built for was this a DC to cloud migration? I think it is. Yeah, so this DC to cloud migration, we created a schedule for when we think it's going to complete. Now, there will be changes to the schedule, right? Let's say, for example, this schedule is then being shown in 5 different pages. So this schedule, I would then put it into an excerpt macro, and then use the excerpt include macro in 5 different pages. And then every time the project schedule changes, let's say there's a delay to some items within the project, then I just move it within this schedule and it will affect all 5 pages. So all 5 pages will be updated. Because I often see this happening with a lot of Confluence spaces. The person would then need to update all 5 pages. It's really cumbersome. So rather than doing that, just use excerpt include. All right, next slide. What we discussed about keeping content up to date makes up a big part of generating quality content. But there are many more things to consider as well, such as content curation, overall look and feel, real estate, and minimalism. So let's look at some ideas here. All right, the first one is Komala workflows, which can drastically increase the quality of your content. This add-on is particularly useful for curating content for use cases such as knowledge-based articles. A common use case for this is, let's say, for example, your support team member recently resolved a particularly complex and new issue. She or he now wants to make sure that other customers encountering the issue are able to self-help without raising another ticket. This is what we call issue deflection. And if you are interested, we can discuss further on how you can measure issue deflection as a metric with a combination of Jira Service Management and Confluence. Talk to our sales team if you want to find out more. Now, back to the topic. So say the support team member then creates a knowledge-based article in the KB space. It will be risky for the organization to then publish the KB article immediately to the public without peer review or curation. This is where Komala workflows come in, because the page can then be sent to technical review after the draft is published. And then once all approvals are received, it has received the necessary technical review, for example, to make sure that whatever is being suggested in the KB would not break instances, then only then should it be published to the public. Because I've seen it in the past where there was KB articles being published that suggest customers to delete from plugin data, let's say, in Confluence. You know what's going to happen if you run that query in Confluence? It's going to solve a lot of the look and feel problems that you have in Confluence. But then at the same time, you'll realize that you suddenly do not have add-on installed anymore in your instance. It's crazy. All right. Next slide, please. On the topic of content quality, we are often tempted to just inject as much content as we can into every single nook and cranny of the page. This can be good in some cases, like a dashboard to show you multiple pieces of information at the same time, but can be detrimental in some use cases. You need to consider the aim of your content. Is it to engage or is it to show? Because sometimes you might want a dashboard where users can see multiple different information at the same time, a quick glance. So those, it's okay to not have white space that much, but for engagement related content like blogs, company news, landing pages, then white space is very important. Next slide, please. So let's look at two examples here. The first one is this advertisement. What do you guys think? Is this engaging? Is this a very good ad? And why? Is it a good ad or is it a bad ad? And why? Yep, too busy. Rob mentioned that. Good. Yeah, it's just too many elements on the ad. So there's no, you're not even sure what's the call to action here. Is the call to action the games room, the jumping pillow? I'm not even sure. Or is it a call to call that number? Right. Let's contrast that to the next slide, please. Yep, thank you. Yeah, and you see this slide here, the call to action is very clear. Go to beyond your world. I mean, we were just trying to cram this ad into a very small slide. But if you can see it in its original form, the website is very clear at the bottom. Now we can't see it. But yeah, what I'm trying to highlight here is white space is not usually white. Sometimes it can be just like, it can be even just an image, something that's soothing to the eye, draws your attention to the call to action. Simple. You don't have to even advertise what's all of this about. You, by what they're carrying, you know that this is a scuba diving related gear, right? All right, next slide. Okay. Now, how to ensure a clean look? The first way you can achieve that is to aim for minimalism. With Confluence, always less is more. So always keep that in mind. Less is more. Even for dashboards, even just now I mentioned dashboards, you should show as many information as possible. But when it's too easy, users kind of, get confused as well. So think about it. Is that extra pie chart really that necessary for your users to see? Is that link that you add to the page, are there a lot of click-through? Is it very important? So always try to figure out what's the least amount of content you can add to a page for it to be engaging. Always consider the call to action as well. Every time you create a page within Confluence, figure it out. What's the call to action here? Think also about the different user personas that will be using the same page. An admin user definitely would need to see more or a different kind of content than a regular user. Showing all elements that are unnecessary to a regular user is a surefire way to get them disengaged or confused really quickly. Imagine yourself getting on a bus as a passenger And then while you're walking to your seat, you realize the seats have pedals and steering wheels, right? It'll be quite interesting, but it will be very, very confusing. All right, next slide, please. So let's look at some examples that we built before. So a good example of a clean look is what we built for NRL, which is the National Rugby League. Keep note of the amount of white space and key elements that ensure minimalism while we are highlighting the call to action here. So the first one is the large search bar. I would argue that the Confluence search box, the small tiny search box at the top, is not very clear to users. We actually did some persona interviews before, and we found that some users actually don't even realize it's there. They don't know that a search box actually exists. So one thing that you can do that can drastically improve your engagement, especially if you're designing landing pages, is you have a large search bar. It immediately draws attention to the call to action, which is really great. And this can be built with Refine. I will discuss Refine shortly after this. So the next slide, please. Now, this is the main call to action we want to bring the users to, which is the important links that we want them to click on. So this what I consider the eye level links, eye level content, because it's in the middle of the page. All right, the next slide. And then this is the content by label, which is where the magic happens. Now, content by label, this macro, we use it in conjunction with another ServiceRocket add-on called Visibility for Confluence. And the Visibility for Confluence app is really, really cool. It can show you different content based on your group memberships, based on your permissions, those kind of stuff, even based on your username, let's say. And then in this case, we show a different content for users that have already subscribed versus a new user to NRL. And then this is going to make sure that the users are clicking on content that makes sense to them. It's going to draw them more into actual click-through. So you're going to see a higher click-through rate because the content shown here by the content by label will be more relevant. All right, next slide. In terms of real estate, this is also very important to discuss, which is real estate. And for Confluence, real estate is as simple as just reduce the need to scroll. I often see people tend to build pages where they just put everything from top to bottom and then just everything in a single column. Now that's going to make people scroll a lot, and they are not going to be able to see content that you want them to see. Now, next slide, please. An example is this one. Now, anyone able to spot what is the element that reduces the need to scroll here? What is the element here that increases real estate? Subtly, it's very subtle over there. Anyone able to spot it? Navigation bar, yeah. Anyone wants to guess how is that navigation bar created? Yeah, box winner, correct. How is that navigation bar created? Anyone wants to guess? Is it using individual links and then with a pipe in the middle, or is it something else? Anchors, yeah, it can be built with anchors, correct. But how we did it here, if you go to the next slide, it may surprise you. Correct, yay, Ego, nice. It's the table of contents. So how you can do it is, we often use table of contents that we just insert it into a page and we forget about it, right? I do that all the time. I just create a page, I just put a table of contents at the top, forget about it. But what we don't realize is actually if you edit the table of contents, there's a lot of options you can do to it. In this case, you can set it to flat format. There's a bunch of other Confluence macros that you can do this as well to get real estate. So this one is the one that I want you guys to go back home and try it out for yourself. Maybe it'll be useful for you. All right, next slide, please. The other thing that I find very interesting is in the past with the old Confluence editor, hardly anyone ever uses layouts, sections, and panels. Now with the new editor, they actually surface the layout button easily. So now we are actually seeing more and more content creators utilizing layout. So this is no longer an issue that I need to emphasize too much, but it's still good for you to ponder. So next slide, please. So make full use of the columns. In this case, like for example, if you want to show content that is rather small, maybe try to put it in a 2-column format. But remember, do not go overboard, and then put in 3 columns, and then just put in all contents you can in all 3 columns, because it's going to reduce the white space and it's going to make the content look more messy and busy. All right. To wrap it up, I think really quickly is just to go through some design examples. The next slide, please. This is one that we created for New South Wales Transport. You can see the call to action is very clear here, which is the 3 darker color bars that we want users to be clicking on. And then we have a bunch of items there that they can click on to quickly get to, for example, the different projects. They can even get to the Jira Service Management portal easily. And then next slide, please. And then this is like a refine theme. So refine is this add-on that you can purchase. You don't have to get the most out of Confluence. You don't have to, but if you want, refine is going to give you a bit more customization than what standard Confluence is going to provide. And I'm going to show you what you can achieve with refine. By the way, ServiceRocket is a refine platinum partner. So in terms of our knowledge of building sites with refine and Confluence, we are definitely one of the best. Hopefully that's true. But anyway, let's go to the next slide. You can see why this is good, because you have a top navigation bar that you can highly customize with links to important categories or spaces. The one that you see in standard Confluence, you cannot really modify it. It's like the dashboard, create a page. But with Refine, you can specify what you want here. Total customization for the top navigation bar. And then next slide, please. And then you have the large search bar that you can add in the middle of the page. You can also have the search bar at the top navigation bar as well. And then next slide. And then you have the sidebar. Now the sidebar is quite interesting. Some people prefer to hide it for a cleaner look. I like it, and some of my customers like it as well. So this allows you to hit the create button easily because it's just there. Based on my experience and my personal opinion, I think in terms of UX, this is quite a good thing to have. I mean, sidebar hasn't really picked up yet in terms of the UX world for what we consider good design, but I'm sure eventually it will be. I just have confidence and faith that it will be. So next slide, please. And then this is the meat of the content. Next slide. Relevant pages. This is a widget within Refine that you can add, and it's cool because it allows you to search for relevant pages using CQL. And then what is also cool is all of the icons that it surfaces. It will look for an image within the page, and then it will use that as the icon. So it makes it look a bit nicer than if it is just a link. Very nice. All right, relevant blocks, spaces, and activity. It's going to show you all the user activity blocks that are relevant. I'm not sure, are you guys still using blocks in Confluence? It's getting less and less right now. I'm seeing the trend because at one time blocks was the main feature of Confluence, but it seems like people are starting to let go of that feature already. But yeah, blocks, etc. You can highlight it here. And then the next one, next slide, please. This is particularly important, next slide, which is the recently visited or worked on, because chances are, if you've already worked on a page, and Confluence is a wiki, it's easy to forget that. We always assume Confluence is just a page, like a application to show pages, but we forget that it's actually a wiki, and we're meant to keep updating it. We meant to publish a draft, and we're going to collaborate and update the draft together. That's the whole purpose of Confluence, but people now are very reluctant to publish their pages until it's completely perfect in their mind. So I would suggest just publish whatever you have as a draft, and then come back to it later, tell people about it, and then work on it together in a collaborative format. And then the next one is the footer. Next slide, please, which is a good way to wrap things up, which is the quick navigation from the current page. Now with Refine, you can specify whatever you want in the footer, which is different than Confluence it is right now. Unless you have Confluence DC. If you have Confluence DC, you can actually modify your footer quite a bit by changing the VM file. But I would recommend just using Refine because it's going to look a lot nicer and easier for you to configure. All right, and that's it. That's the end of the session. If you have any questions, feel free to add it to the chat and we can hopefully answer them.
Yep.
All right, I pass time back to Mario. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Fugi, looks like we already have a question here. How limited is Confluence Cloud when it comes to customizations?
It's very limited because Confluence Cloud does not allow user macros. A lot of our design with our customers when it comes to landing pages relies a lot on user macros. User macros allow you to add JavaScript, to add buttons, CSS customization, anything you can think of, you can do it with user macros. I also wrote a blog about why user macros is the most underutilized, yet the most powerful feature of Confluence. You can search for it in blog.servicerocket.com about user macros, and it tells you how you should inject JavaScript the right way. And then also, Confluence Cloud doesn't allow layout customization, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it doesn't allow layout customization. You also cannot have custom HTML and certain apps that will transform the JavaScript. But with Refine, if you have Refine can actually create a site of its own for your Confluence. So your users will then access the site via something.refine.site, and it's not an .lsn.net URL, so you can do whatever you want on that site. Now, the thing is then Refine allows you to access the site using a custom domain. So people can be like accessing your site at, let's say, yourcompany.com, and they would see your Confluence page, which is a Confluence Cloud page, but it is hosted on Refine, and you can do whatever customizations you want to it. Very cool.
Gotcha. Thank you, Fugi.
Welcome.
We still have a few minutes. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to ask Fugi. I guess we don't have any other questions. Fugi, thank you very much, guys. Fugi, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's call as well. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and soon we're going to choose the next topic for the next webinar. Thank you very much, guys.